We've held so many of these roundtable discussions over the past, what's now 6 months, 7 months, which is kind of nuts. And sustainability, of course, has been a really, really big part of it. When we first started, I think one of the things that we found was, well, we kind of struggled a bit, didn't we, with knowing, like, how do we approach sustainability as a topic in these conversations, given we've got limited time, a lot of people when we're doing our roundtables that are interested, and a way that we need to break it down so the conversation just doesn't become just being about why sustainability is important, which I think was part of the risk. You know, that we'd have a roundtable and it would just say, yeah, absolutely, the industry needs to change. And we wanted something that was a bit more tangible than that, basically. So what we tried to do basically is break it down, make it really approachable, make it really digestible, and do that by focusing in on different topic areas within that sort of broader thing of sustainability. Very obvious to say, but it was so important to us to really make sure that we were doing it right. So we've explored everything from scaling circularity to exploring overproduction and growth. And now here we are looking at sustainable storytelling, or indeed how to avoid greenwashing, to coin that phrase. So I can't wait to dig into it. I think tonight's a really important conversation.
FashMash Live is sponsored by Klaviyo. They are an e-commerce marketing platform formed for all brands of all shapes and sizes, from Skinny Dip London to High Studios. The key thing about them is that they focused on growth. So that is everything from precision targeting to brilliant insights. And we would love to give all of you the opportunity for a free trial. Go to klaviyo.com, that's spelled klaviyo.com/FashMash to start your free trial today. So Rachel, I want to know what has been inspiring you this week.
Indeed, yeah. So we always start with our inspiration. Every week I rack my brains thinking, you know, when you've had one of these weeks, you consume so many things and you think, what is actually genuinely inspiring? And I'm super pleased with this week's one because I feel like I've got a really, really good one. So this comes from Patagonia. And this was actually 2 weeks ago, but I'm still using it because I only discovered it in this past week. And I was really, really annoyed with myself for not seeing it sooner, but I just thought it was a really nice one. So they've just revealed they're selling a line of shorts that have a message inside, stitched in the label, that says, "Vote the arseholes out." And I thought that was amazing. First of all, I thought it's clearly like guerrilla marketing or something. Well, it is guerrilla marketing, but it is actually done by the brand, legitimately done by the brand. And they are apparently about getting consumers to indeed vote out, in this case, the climate deniers, which is what they say they've always been about. And of course, that being very pertinent right now to what's going on in the US. So very, very clever, if nothing for the fact that it obviously has generated some very solid social conversation around what that means and gives them some good buzz. And it also ties really nicely to, of course, tonight's conversation around sustainable storytelling, but also around brand purpose, which of course is a future focused roundtable that we are going to be hosting soon, that we'll keep everybody posted on, which is, you know, taking a stance on things like politics and what that basically means for your branding and your marketing. So more on that one soon. So that's mine. What's yours, Rosanna?
So I have been watching Fashion Month unfold. Interestingly, I'd love to know what everyone else has been doing. For me, I've been reading the show reports, but I haven't actually been watching any shows live. I tuned into Mutua's conversation with Raf Simons just because that was seminal and so important, and I feel like they had so much to say about the industry, but I haven't actually been watching the shows live. How about everyone else? I'd love to know your thoughts. But my favorite that I just wanted to comment on, there is obviously the Moschino puppet show with the creators behind the Muppets, which is on our feed, and also Halpen's film with 8 key workers, which again we reference on our feed. Both of them were so brilliantly innovative, and I think it has so many repercussions for how we can showcase collections from here moving forward. But actually, I think particularly pertinent for today's conversation is Gabriela Hearst, who showed yesterday for the first time in Paris. She, for me, is the leader in sustainability in designer luxury fashion, at least. She won the CFDA award last month for Women's Wear Designer of the Year. And it may seem at odds for an American designer to be showing in Paris. Like, is that really in keeping with her sustainable message? But actually, the majority of her collection is produced in Italy, and she said it made sense logistically and actually environmentally as well. So all credit to her. And the thing that really caught my eye, and I just think is a brilliant starting point today, she spoke to Vogue yesterday. ahead of the show, and gave this quote. At least people are talking about sustainability now. It wasn't that long ago that I was talking about sustainability and a consultant said to me, don't say that, you're going to open a can of worms. Sometimes the fear of not doing it right is stopping people from doing it at all. We don't have that luxury anymore. Now people understand that overproduction pushes overconsumption. We're all uncomfortable with that, but there has to be accountability. There's not a governing body that regulates me. It's my moral compass and us doing all the homework.
I love this one so much, and I think there's just so many like buzzwords in there that are so relevant. I mean, that idea, like, yeah, there's a lot of homework to do, but also that can of worms is now fully open. So yeah, the great reference. I really like that. And as you rightly said, a very nice segue into our topic for this evening, which is of course sustainable storytelling. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to ensure with our roundtable discussions on sustainability that we broke it down in kind of enough of a way that we actually got some tangible results from each conversation. You know, for us, it wasn't just enough to say, you know, this is how things are, you know, things need to change, but actually, how can we start to help try and change it? And this really came into the discussion around sustainable storytelling so much. Just to be clear very quickly, what we mean by storytelling here is essentially all communications from the brand. So marketing, PR, social media, creative assets, you name it, anything that kind of falls under that umbrella of comms, essentially. And the point here, I think, that I want to make is that sustainability as a subject is enormous, let alone as a piece of strategy or actual strategy, or indeed as an entire industry transformation, which is, of course, what is actually needed. So in the same way that it can't just happen overnight because it is so huge, what I want to acknowledge is the fact that it also cannot just be about marketing or PR or indeed storytelling, comms, etc. So that's what I wanted to preface tonight's conversation with. And I think it's really important because I see it a lot with a lot of the consulting work that I do. You know, so often it's one of the very first questions that I get asked still, which is simply, you know, can you put a strategy, an outline strategy or roadmap for us together for sustainability? And within all of that, how quickly can we get a press release for this ready? And I just find that really interesting. Now, coming from a journalist background, I'm all for starting with the headline and working backwards. I actually think it's a really smart way to approach strategy, but it can't be backwards in its intention, full stop. And I fear that sometimes it really still is with sustainability, which is of course where greenwashing comes in, which we'll come to quite a lot in this conversation. Now, the other thing to say, kind of within all of this scene setting, is that in spite of that concern, the reason for focusing on this subject tonight is because we know and we want to acknowledge that storytelling is also a crucial part of how we facilitate, how we motivate, and how we inspire change in this world. So fashion has a massive role to play in all of this because it does have that ability, as you pointed out with your examples already, has that massive ability to inspire through creativity, and we really can't forget that at all.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, one of the challenges of sustainable storytelling is how easy it is to focus on the doom and gloom. And I know that you and I always find this when we're discussing it in the focus calls that we had. It really came up right at the forefront. Rightly so, in many senses. You know, I think that's why you and I feel quite pulled about this, because it is a climate crisis. Those words exist for a reason. But consumers don't want to feel overwhelmed and confused. And I think historically that is what has happened. So really, it must be approached via a lens of positivity, of sustainability, and of regeneration. And that is what is going to create the good engagement. Totally. I think that if that's one thing that everybody takes away from this live, it's this lens of positivity that we have to remember, and I think a realistic lens of positivity. I'm a contributor to EcoAge, so I always look at it through their stance. They were founded on this principle of progress and positivity, not perfection. That kind of perfection we all know will never be possible when in this space. They're gearing up for the Green Carpet Fashion Awards this weekend, which typically take place in the Teatro alla Scala, excuse my Italian accent, in Milan. They're going to take place online for the first time this weekend, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that is going to unfold, because they typically reward the unsung heroes of this space, and the stories that are discussed on stage and no doubt online this year are really, really inspiring. So I recommend you all watch.
Yeah, what a year for it.
Well, exactly. Oh, we had Kelly Green, the editor of the Eco Age magazine, on one of our focus session calls. And the magazine was founded 2 years ago, and she said it was really fascinating to watch the step change that has taken place in those last 2 years. But the appetite for brands to be on that magazine now is just palpable, she says. And, that obviously that editorial stance of positivity does work. They're rallying to join the conversation, and readers and consumers will be turned off if there is too much jargon in that conversation, too many facts, too many figures, even if it's with good intentions, which I do believe it generally normally is. I think a great throwback reference here is one of our very first lives that Rachel and I ever did. As Rachel's inspiration, she chose a podcast called So Hot Right Now, which is hosted by Lucy Siegel and Tom, I forget his surname, but he is a brilliant film director. He directed The True Cost. Well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But on that, the episode I will recommend to you, Ellie Goulding, obviously renowned singer, but also passionate eco-activist, said that whenever she shares facts and figures on her Instagram, which she does because they're shocking and because she wants to inspire people to make a change, she loses followers. So I think that is just a brilliant and very tangible example of how this all works. Maybe it's
Tom Mustill.
Tom
Mustill. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. We have the correct reference there. And maybe, the facts and figures thing, it's symptomatic. The consumers are savvy. It's because it's so related to greenwashing, more of which later, because Rachel is the real, she's very passionate about that and talks about it brilliantly. But I think overall, the takeaway from the conversations that we've been having, it is a combination of positivity and that lens of positivity, but also transparency, crucially.
Yeah.
Transparency is the only way forward. This is something that every brand could and should commit to. And it doesn't need to mean perfection. Brands that we spoke to all agreed that the ones that are doing it best are actually the ones that are doing one thing and doing it really well. So brands like Veja trainers, Allbirds shoes. I think also it's worth saying that this level of transparency is a lot easier for younger brands. That they're just starting out. They can make sure that right from the roots, they're fully accountable and transparent. So the jumper I'm wearing today, Sheep Inc., they have NFC tags right there, which you can scan with your phone. You adopt a sheep when you buy a jumper. And if I scan my tag at any time, I can find out about my sheep. Who gave me this wonderful wool. Or there's Gabriela Hearst, mentioning her again, in just this summer she will launch the Garment Journey, which is again run via digital technology. So great examples of brands sharing an emotional journey with their consumer.
Yeah, and we heard lots of examples, didn't we? You're right. I mean, ultimately it is just that much easier if you're, of course, starting from the beginning with trying to figure all of this out than obviously those who have got to work backwards through years and years, I guess, of systems, but also tradition and everything else. But I love that idea of progress, not perfection. I think it's such a nice way of putting it, that actually what we just need to do is something and to get going. But to your earlier point, it is a really tough balance to strike. And between that idea of saying how bad it is, as you said, the idea that we're in a climate or ecological crisis or emergency, we're not saying that for fun. Like, that is literally the case. So it is important that consumers are aware of that, of course. But the difficulty is you don't want to guilt them. And that's one of the real issues within all of this, is that actually putting it onto the consumer and guilting them into not making decisions, or making decisions one way or the other, it is not a good way of going about things, because actually it just leads to a lot of confusion and being even more overwhelmed, and actually not particularly anything in the way of progress. And I don't think actually we're at a point yet we're definitely not at a point yet where consumers have enough information at their fingertips, nor do they actually have the right solutions at their fingertips, because the industry isn't yet in a place where it can give it to them. So it can't be on the consumer alone to make the change, because we're just not there. but you're right, like positivity is a really sort of valid side of it. I think the risk of being too positive, of course, as we've said, is around greenwashing. Now, if you take two really obvious examples, and I'll come back to them, but H&M is one, because of course they always get accused of it, or frankly they just always do it, or ASOS is another, and that one I'll come back to particularly and explain a bit more about in case you didn't see it, but they just hit the headlines last week for the exact same reasons. Now, I think here, overloading on data is one thing. And again, I'm going to come back to that more in a moment as well. But perhaps even more so is the fact that what we're seeing is many brands basically launching these so-called sustainable or conscious or circular, whatever you want to call it, collections. So they're just one sort of small subset line that chalks up a load of press because, you know, it's really great that they're doing it, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it's just sat alongside huge volumes of product that are otherwise still being sold via that business as usual model. So it's, you know, stack them high, price them cheap, get them out the door kind of thing. The ASOS one is the perfect example. So they launched something last week called the ASOS Design Circular Collection. And in the words of sustainability activist Venetia Lamanna, it's a start, but this collection represents just 0.035% of the brand's 85,000 strong product offering. So yeah, not really enough. And the point here is like that just doesn't make a brand sustainable. Now, if you're in the space, you know that, you understand that, you work in it, you get that that doesn't mean that ASOS is saying that they are sustainable. But consumers don't necessarily know that themselves. You know, this basically, in many ways, gives a consumer permission to shop with you because you're making it out as though you are sustainable. And that is what we call plain greenwashing. And there will come a time, most definitely, and H&M have already been called out for it before, there will become a time when that is straight illegal. And that's what we are working towards massively. In the meantime, whilst I am massively on that side of this whole conversation, I think we do need to be very, very clear, and we do need to really distinguish within all of this. So my other side of it is that focusing on circular design, recycling, new materials, all, you know, the list goes on and on and on. All of these things are really positive steps forward, and we need big players to be doing them. You know, the point is here, we need these players to prove in many ways that these kind of collections are viable in the market. But the point is, until they're at scale, they don't count as truly environmentally or socially sound. And that's the thing that we have to keep bearing in mind. And what I think is crucial here then is that we talk about actionable takeaways. And I think what we can do out of this from a storytelling perspective is really talk about honesty. So loads of the brands that we talk about all the time are still in a place where they are very, very scared about being criticized constantly, both with what they're doing now and with what they've done in the past. And I think one of the things we need to look at is that owning up to the challenges that exist with all of this, you know, the struggles that are present, the journey that you're on, all of that is not only then not greenwashing, but is potentially also really, really helpful for others who are looking to make progress in this space. And I think that's why some of the brands that you mentioned, you know, the ones that are doing just the singular product focus or category focus, are so great, because actually, you know, you look at what they're doing and it's really helpful to others to look at the parts of that they can take for themselves to start making changes as well. Sheep Inc. is a perfect example, you know, really doing that in a way that's incredibly open, incredibly honest, really transparent, so that others can learn from it as well. And actually, you know, those that genuinely are on the side of a more sustainable industry want progress across the board, because that's obviously, of course, what's needed. So I think thinking about that through the storytelling lens is really, really potentially a really positive perspective. You know, it's really central to it at the end of the day. But for storytelling, it's pretty complicated. And I know you wanted to talk about newness particularly and how that comes into this, or the challenge of all of this.
So yeah, newness. I mean, storytelling in all of its forms, really, I think what fascinates me here is the third party side of storytelling. So traditional media, earned media, you know, the fashion industry, we are all getting better at, brands are getting better at having their own channels through which they share their stories. That might be social, that might be a fashion film at Fashion Week, but earned media and traditional press is still hugely respected and impactful. And when it comes to traditional press, the same prerogative withstands. What is the story and what is new? Like Rachel was saying earlier, what is the headline? Now, in the case of sustainability in 2019, journalists were actively seeking stories about sustainability. From it was the buzzword from rental to resale. That was you can every newspaper you open, every magazine you open, it was endless. It was
Yeah.
palpable, this change. But how is that going to play out in the long term? Slow fashion is defined by fewer drops and a smaller product offering. So that is at odds with the way the media traditionally worked. So I think, first off, let's remember that when it comes to sustainability, when it is no longer a buzzword, that is a great thing, because that means that it is a fully integrated part of a brand, rather like digital today. I'm sure we all remember when brands opening a new website or starting e-commerce was a headline. Now, obviously, it's not, because digital is fully integrated into a business. So I think that is a really important stage that I hope we get to in the next couple of years, or if not sooner. And there has been a step change. So one of our members who was on our most recent Focus Roundtable session, Hannah Levitt, so she has founded Green Banana PR. And her career background, she started at Stella McCartney, then went to EcoAge, then Mother of Pearl, and has now started her own agency focused on sustainable brands. And she said she noticed, well, when she began, there was a time when press were just not interested in the sustainability story, and neither were consumers, because it had those hippie, Hessian vibes, and it wasn't alluring in the typical glamorous fashion way. Now, press and influencers are actively seeking out sustainable product and sustainable stories, and that is the switch. It has been taken to an extreme, and the consumer is inundated with facts and figures, as we keep saying, many of which are contradictory. But ultimately, and Hannah mentioned this, but so did many of us, and I know it's something that Rachel and I feel very strongly about, the focus has to be on the product, not on sustainability. If the product is good enough, the story will come. And sustainability in itself is not enough of a story anymore. I feel we've all reached beyond that point. And actually, just thinking of that brand that we all mentioned, Mother of Pearl, I know that there are, I mean, this is very anecdotal, but personal experience, I have lots of friends who buy that brand and actually don't really have any idea it's sustainable, just love that it's a beautiful British brand. I mean, yeah, with regard to the facts and figures, I do find them overwhelming. I mean, Rach, I know you receive a huge number of press releases, but also just on a consumer level. Do you think it's gone too far?
Yeah, I do, in so many ways. I think you're right. There is like massive overload right now, and that definitely goes for consumers, but 100% also for those in the industry, you know, for journalists who then have to interpret all of these things and then share them and make sure they're sharing them in a way that's accurate and right. And I think part of the challenge right now is just how much misinformation there is out there. You know, and that's not necessarily saying that a brand is putting misinformation out there, but they're relying on stats that aren't necessarily true because the whole industry uses them, and the whole industry is kind of basing it on things that aren't necessarily accurate. I've spent the past month, as you well know, working on a big new consulting project that I'm very excited about, and I can't wait to be able to share it when I'm allowed. But the sort of the part I can share now is that I've been working in a really, really deep way to try and get to grips with everything that's out there in this space right now. So everything to do with environmental and social, sort of where the standing of the industry is, if that makes sense. Or rather, maybe more than get to grips with it, really pull it apart and actually look at where we end up. And the truth is, it is an absolute minefield. It's a minefield of facts, of figures, data, statistics, you name it. And so much of it is unproven, and so much of it is confusing. So much of it's based on like generalizations and then sort of all bucketed together and a numbers thrown out there, and then people repeat it and repeat it. And there's been, I'm not by any means close to being the first person to say this, like there's been a lot of incredible coverage of exactly this point, of people really trying to help the industry understand that a lot of this those so-called facts that are out there are not very easy to track back to original source and prove that they're right. So massive word to the wise here. Take a look at the New Standard Institute's new report. It's called Roadmap for the Rebuild, and I'll ask Hannah to share it, and again we'll share it afterwards as well. This is like a veritable treasure trove of steps that can be taken across the industry at large, working towards sustainability. But one of the points they make that I really love and I think is so important under this header of storytelling, sustainable storytelling, is its advice for the media to really ensure that they are reading between the lines of press releases and rigorously pulling apart things that are shared as fact, because they're not always necessarily the case. And I think that's really important to not assume that things are fact, and to make sure that we actually do our due diligence on it. And the NSI, New Standards Institute, is apparently also working on a fact-checking database. And I really love this, because basically what they're doing is they're going to score the commonly quoted facts against how reliable their source is, so that you'll know whether it's strong enough or not, basically. And I probably should confess, you know, as you guys well know, like, I'm a journalist by background, and I'm completely guilty of this myself. I think we've all had a bit of a wake-up call over the past couple of years. Like, I've referenced loads of those headline-grabbing stats in the past, and we all did it. We took it all as gospel, because we thought they came from a really reputable source. But because, you know, the issue is that it then gets quoted in a big publication that you then also assume is reputable, and that goes on and on and on. Suddenly everybody's saying it. No one knows where it originally came from. So I'm massively more diligent myself now. I will really, really fact check everything. But I think more importantly, or in addition, I will also caveat it alongside very heavily, because it's also not always possible. So yeah, it's getting more and more complicated, but we're all, I think, at least becoming more aware of it. So I really liked that idea of really making sure that you're reading between the lines of a press release. I think is critical. And then I think the other side of all of this, just on that sort of greenwashing and being overwhelmed with data, is that I also think the slight risk we've got at the moment is that we're potentially entering into a period when those brands who are really ahead on sustainability and who have been doing a great job at communicating it to date now really have a responsibility not to take it too far. And I say that because I've seen a number in luxury particularly where they kind of taken that proviso of following the science, and they've kind of gone too far with it. And to your point earlier, Rosanna, I think the outcome is incredibly overwhelming and confusing for anyone consuming it, because basically it's essentially like greenwashing again, right? Because if you're making it so complicated because you're throwing so many stats and facts, even if they're all 100% accurate, right? Everything's accurate, but you're throwing it all at the wall so everybody can fully understand everything you're doing from a scientific basis, and it's too complicated to understand, then you're in this world where actually it's very hard for the consumer to understand if it's real or not, because they can't understand it. And I think that's a massive risk. And I think it potentially can make it feel like you're hiding behind it again. And that's also not okay. So I think there's a big learning here, which is that we really need to be transparent, as we said. We really need to be open and honest, but we also need to keep it simple. Like, there's a lot to be said for keeping it really simple. Like, yes, inform everybody, because it's incredibly complex issues and it's really important that we all understand it more, but break it down, like really break it down. And that's like the number one rule of storytelling or journalism anyway in the first place. So I think that's really crucial. And I think that goes beyond just being about to your consumers as well, right? I think that's about feeding internally into the business, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is now our fourth or fifth conversation focused on sustainability, and in every one, what is so important, and again it links back to the digital revolution, when the digital departments in brands used to be siloed off in a broom cupboard somewhere. And it's the same. I was in said broom cupboard. I
had a job interview in a broom cupboard. True. I got the job.
Did you then work in the broom cupboard?
No, I didn't actually. I did do that before.
Okay, moving on from broom cupboard.
Yeah, I graduated to the news desk, but anyway.
Nice. But too often, sustainability now, it's the same thing. It is siloed from the rest of the brand, from the rest of the company. And for this to work, everybody has to be invested, and everybody has to be informed and educated about this hugely important matter that we're all confronted with. They have to be, so it's all company stakeholders. I'm talking the board as well as the employees. And
Yeah.
they have to be fully educated, I think, also in the business targets and in the business initiatives. So a bit like what we were saying earlier about the storytelling success of brands like Veja. I think I've seen real success personally here in brands that are run by millennials or Gen Z, because for them, the climate crisis is a passion. It is also intrinsic to their very being. Take ones with the circular business model. I've really noted how well integrated it is at brands like the Restory. They have launched in Harrods today, brilliant repair business. Equally, brands like Bundly, which is rental, and Her, which is also rental. And every member of the team is informed about those initiatives and why it is so integral to the business model. But equally, it can be done at scale. And for me, Selfridges, Project Earth, and we were lucky enough to have Anna Ahern from their social media team on one of our focus calls. It is integral to the business. And think about how many employees they have there. And they equally make it very clear that this is progress, not perfection, their Project Earth initiative. But it is a long-term initiative that is just beginning this year. It will go on for years, and every employee is fully invested. And then a little example that I had while listening to a podcast this morning, Wardrobe Crisis. I was catching up on archive episodes because I love it. And Claire Press interviewed Anya Heinmarch. Now, Anya, this year, she forewent a traditional fashion show in February at London Fashion Week, before it all changed anyway. And instead, she filled her Bond Street store with 90,000 recycled plastic bottles and closed the store. And
Gosh, I realised it was that many.
It was that many. And she wanted this visual manifestation in a very luxury space of the climate crisis. It was that juxtaposition of the luxury and these dead, discarded bottles. Now, impressive headline. But I think what's so great here is that the whole company got involved. So every employee had a weekly target of plastic bottles that they had to gather from gyms, from parks. Apparently the Eurostar train was a great place to get bottles because everybody was leaving their bottles before they got off the other end. And I loved that every member of the team, from the accountant to the marketing team, and Anya actually had a board up in her office with success. And if you were falling behind, she would send you an email saying you need more plastic bottles, and actually often suggest team up with X in PR who has found this great resource of plastic bottles. Anyway, I just loved that initiative, and I loved how it got everyone so involved. It made me feel really passionate about just involvement and working as a team, and not thinking, oh, I'll leave that to the sustainability experts in the corner.
Yeah, true. Especially as that's often one or two people. They can't collect 90,000 bottles on their own. That's an amazing example. I really love it. And actually, it reminds me of Selfridges. What they've got is just a great example of a business that's pushing it out across the board. They've got what they call their green warriors. So it's people that are very actively about sustainability. It's like a task force across the whole business, so they can come from any department, and that's really nice because they then basically act as the advocates to then push it around other parts of the business, which obviously if you've such a large organization is really, really crucial. Obviously very different when you're small and it's embedded from the beginning. So yeah, I couldn't agree with this more. And I noticed Ashumi, who's watching, made a comment about it being really critical for the marketing team, and that's one of the points I wanted to make as well. Is like, so often I see with my clients that the sustainability strategy is set by the central team, at head office, by a dedicated sustainability team. And then it has to cascade, obviously, to regional offices and then out to local markets when it comes to storytelling. And in those cases, I think it's even more important to make sure that you are absolutely on the same page internally by everybody being educated on it properly, just to make sure that you're getting it right, so that it's actually being interpreted in the way that it is intended. And also, I think that there's then the reverse side of that as well. If you're cascading your sustainability strategy out to marketing and to those local markets, that has to feed back the other way as well. There's a lot that obviously comes full circle on all of this in terms of informing what that strategy should be in the first place. So I think it all connects, and I think, yeah, I think it's really important that those silos are really broken down, and that, so, you know, at some point, will there be sustainability just across the entire business? Hopefully, as you said, we've seen with digital, but I think until then, it has to be a very active exercise to make sure that it happens otherwise. And I think that's why the Selfridges Green Warriors is such a nice example.
I love that
And I
idea.
think the
Yeah.
other, yeah, it's great, and I've seen that with a few other examples as well. Net-a-Porter also have a task force when they did their Net Sustain, that
Ah.
came from parts of the business as well, which was really strong. I also think that responsibility to educate extends beyond consumers, though, and that's the sort of last point I wanted to just mention tonight before we move on to questions. And that's just that we've got to go beyond just thinking about the shopper and thinking about the responsibility we've got as a brand. You know, no matter how big or small you are, if you're moving forward in sustainability right now, then you have a position as a thought leader, really, to the rest of the industry. So, you know, you are setting the stage for them, and you need to demonstrate that in a positive way. And then, of course, to government. And I think this part of the conversation could be another whole topic in of itself, talking about regulation, which I can really rant about until the cows come home, so I won't right now. But the point I just want to make relative to storytelling is that change can only happen at the hands of this sort of cross collaboration, and not merely through consumers alone. So that storytelling plays a really big part right now in influencing all of those other key players in this whole landscape of change that we're trying to work towards. And it's really important then that as a result that we remember that in our comms strategy work. You know, our audience, when we're looking at our audience profile, and sort of talking about who's there, you've got to remember about these other key stakeholders. And I really do think it's a moral obligation right now that we need to be thinking about how we can influence other stakeholders to help drive change, because we are in ourselves influential brands or influencers themselves, you name it. That comes as a responsibility with all of that. So yeah, that was my sort of point to end on, really, is that storytelling is not just about how to convince the shopper that they should buy your stuff because it's more sustainable, but actually convince an entire industry and policy around the change that needs to happen.
We
Right,
are about to be out of
for
time,
ages.
aren't we?
Yeah.
About to get
We
cut
are.
off by the powers that be on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for bearing with my slight tech mishap at the beginning. Huge thank you to our sponsor, Klaviyo. And thank you, Rachel. Great start to the week.
Thank you, Rosanna. Yeah, indeed. Happy Monday, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.